He was Victor Harrington, America's youngest billionaire, tailored suit, gold watch, and a fortune that made him feel like a king. She was Emily Carter, a small-town waitress with nothing but a faded uniform and an old cracked phone. When Victor mocked her in front of his elite friends, laughing at the sight of her outdated phone, the entire restaurant joined in his cruelty. But destiny had other plans. Seconds later, that same broken phone lit up with a call that would silence the laughter, expose a truth tied directly to Victor's empire, and flip the balance of power in the room. What seemed like a harmless joke quickly spiraled into a life-changing twist, where the billionaire learned that money can't buy everything, and the woman he mocked was holding the one thing that could change his world forever. The restaurant buzzed with the evening rush, silverware clinking, low jazz playing in the background, and waiters rushing from table to table balancing trays. Emily Carter moved briskly between customers, her crisp white shirt tucked neatly into a black skirt, her old phone tucked safely in the side pocket of her apron. It wasn't much to look at, a scratched, outdated model with a small crack across the corner of the screen, but it worked. And that was all that mattered to her. Still, she was painfully aware of how it looked in a place where customers walked in with shiny new iPhones and expensive designer bags. At the corner booth, Victor Harrington leaned back in his chair, the glow of wealth practically radiating off him. He wasn't just rich. He was one of the country's youngest billionaires, known for his ruthless deals, high-profile parties, and cold confidence. His tailored suit, polished watch, and the smirk that never left his face were as much part of his image as his billion-dollar empire. He had come in that night with a group of associates, all laughing loudly, ordering the most expensive items on the menu, and treating the place as if they owned it. Emily approached their table with her usual polite smile, balancing a tray of wine glasses. She had learned long ago that kindness was her best defense, even against the rudest customers. But as she set down the drinks, Victor's eyes fell on the glow of her phone's cracked screen peeking out from her pocket. He chuckled, his voice cutting through the restaurant's soft music. "Is that seriously your phone?" he said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. His friends laughed along with him. "What is that from the Stone Age? Does it even have internet?" Emily's cheeks burned. She wanted to disappear into the floor, but instead she straightened and forced a polite smile. "It works just fine," she said softly, tucking the phone deeper into her pocket. But Victor wasn't finished. "Come on, don't be shy," he pressed, grinning cruelly. "Show us. I'm curious if that thing even takes pictures, or if you still have to draw them yourself." The table erupted in laughter. Emily's chest tightened, but she kept her composure. She'd been mocked before for the little things, her shoes, her bag, her old phone, but somehow tonight the laughter felt heavier. Maybe it was because Victor's voice carried so far, or maybe it was because she could see the pity in a nearby customer's eyes. She muttered an excuse and hurried back toward the counter, trying to focus on her work. Victor leaned back in his seat, clearly pleased with himself. His friends clapped him on the back as if mocking a waitress was some kind of accomplishment. He thrived on power, and humiliating someone less fortunate only fed his ego. But across the restaurant, Emily's phone suddenly buzzed. She pulled it out, her hands trembling slightly. The cracked screen lit up, and the name flashing across it made her heart skip a beat. She froze, staring at the call, her breath catching in her throat. The number was one she had been waiting for, one she never thought she would actually see. For months she had been applying, hoping, praying, and finally it was here. She swiped to answer, her voice shaking. "Hello?" she whispered, turning slightly away from the crowd. Victor noticed, raising an eyebrow as he took a sip of his wine. He smirked again. "Probably her mom calling to remind her to pay the rent," he muttered to his friends, earning another round of chuckles. But then Emily's voice carried across the room, louder this time, disbelief laced with emotion. "Yes, this is Emily Carter," she said, her hand pressed tightly to her ear. Her eyes widened, her lips trembling. "Are you serious? I've been selected?" The words echoed, and for a moment the laughter at Victor's table faltered. Emily's knees felt weak as the voice on the other end confirmed it. She was in. After all the late-night studying, all the side jobs she worked just to pay fees, all the rejections, she had been chosen for something far bigger than herself. She glanced instinctively toward Victor's table, her humiliation still stinging in her chest, but now there was something else in her eyes, something that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't know it yet, but his mocking laughter was about to turn into stunned silence. Emily tightened her grip on the phone, nodding quickly, her voice trembling with excitement. "Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I won't let you down." As she ended the call, her hands shook, but her spine straightened. Something in her had shifted, and Victor, watching her from across the room, felt the first flicker of unease. He had mocked her for being poor, for having nothing, but within seconds she had received news that would change everything. Not just for her, but for him too. The night had just begun, and none of them knew how deeply it was about to unravel. Emily slid the phone back into her apron, her pulse racing, her thoughts spinning so fast she could barely hear the restaurant's noise around her. She had just been told the words she had been dreaming about for months, and though she wanted to shout them from the rooftops, she knew she had to keep her composure. The call confirmed that she had been selected for a prestigious fellowship program in New York City, one that only a handful of people in the entire country were chosen for every year. It was a program funded by some of the largest corporations in America, designed to support young innovators with brilliant ideas. And Emily had been chosen because of a proposal she had submitted late at night on that very same cracked phone Victor had just ridiculed. She wanted to design sustainable nutrition programs for underprivileged families, drawing from her own experiences growing up in poverty where meals were uncertain and opportunities even more scarce. For her, this fellowship wasn't just a chance to change her life, it was a chance to change others' lives too. She gripped the counter to steady herself as tears welled in her eyes, though she forced them back, reminding herself she was still at work. Across the room, Victor was watching closely now. He didn't like the look on her face. It wasn't the broken, embarrassed expression he was used to seeing when people cowered under his mockery. No, this was different. Her chin was lifted, her lips trembled but curved upward ever so slightly, her entire presence glowing with some new kind of strength. He shifted in his seat, muttering to his friend beside him, "Relax, she probably just won free groceries or something." Nothing special, yet his tone lacked conviction. Emily returned to his table moments later with their entrees. She placed the plates carefully in front of each man, her movements steady despite the emotions storming inside her. Victor smirked again, trying to regain control. "So was that your boyfriend? Or maybe a bill collector giving you a hard time?" His friends chuckled again, but their laughter didn't carry the same weight. Emily looked him in the eye for the first time that night, her voice calm, almost serene. "No," she said softly, "it wasn't that at all." Then she walked away without another word. Something about her composure unsettled Victor. He was used to people flinching, apologizing, or shrinking back when he mocked them. But she had stood tall, her eyes unwavering. He found himself frowning, his appetite slipping away. His friends dove into their steaks, but he only pushed his food around his plate. A part of him, though he would never admit it, wanted to know more. What could possibly make a poor waitress with a cracked phone look at him as if she had nothing to fear? Meanwhile, in the back of the restaurant, Emily ducked into the break room for a moment, leaning against the wall. Her co-worker Jenna, a blonde with a sharp tongue and a protective streak, raised an eyebrow. "What's going on? You look like you just got hit by a truck, only in a good way." Emily let out a shaky laugh. "Jenna, I got it. The fellowship. They picked me." Jenna's eyes widened before she squealed, pulling Emily into a hug. "Oh my God, Em. Do you realize what this means? You're out of here. You're finally out." Emily nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks now that she was away from the customer's eyes. "I can't believe it. All those nights, all those rejections. I thought maybe it wasn't meant to be." "Well, it is," Jenna said firmly. "And you know what? That jerk out there, the one who thinks he owns the world, you just proved him wrong without even trying." Emily smiled faintly. "He doesn't know yet. And honestly, I don't care if he ever does. This isn't about him. Still, she couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction at the thought of his smug face faltering. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and stepped back into the dining area. Victor caught sight of her instantly, his curiosity growing stronger. He noticed the way Jenna whispered excitedly to another server, the way Emily's hands still trembled slightly when she picked up plates, but her smile refused to fade. Something had changed in the air, and he didn't like being left out of the secret. By the time dessert was served, Victor could no longer contain himself. As Emily approached to clear their plates, he leaned forward, his voice lower, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "So, what was the call about?" Emily paused, her eyes locking onto his. She considered telling him nothing, letting him stew in his own curiosity, but then she remembered the sting of his laughter, the cruelty in his voice when he mocked her phone. She set the plates down carefully and answered, her voice steady. "It was an opportunity. One you'll probably never understand because it isn't measured in money or power. It's about changing lives." Victor blinked, thrown off by her words. His friends looked at each other uneasily, the usual banter dying on their tongues. For the first time, he didn't have a clever comeback. Emily walked away again, her steps lighter this time, her heart racing with a mixture of relief and defiance. She wasn't going to let him or anyone else take away this moment from her. But Victor sat back in silence, his mind turning. He didn't know what she meant exactly, but for the first time in years, someone had left him speechless. And deep down, a flicker of something unfamiliar began to stir, something he couldn't name yet. It wasn't anger. It wasn't amusement. It was respect. Victor sat in the corner booth long after his friends had gone quiet. The once boisterous table now felt strangely subdued, as though the entire energy of the evening had shifted. He swirled the last sip of wine in his glass, staring at the crimson liquid as though it could explain why a waitress with a cracked phone had managed to pierce through his carefully crafted armor of arrogance. Emily moved around the restaurant with renewed confidence, her steps lighter, her smile less forced. Customers noticed it too. An older couple tipped her generously with warm smiles. A young mother whispered a thank you as Emily helped settle her fussy child. And the restaurant's manager gave her a rare nod of approval. Victor noticed it all, and it unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. For years, he had measured people by their possessions, their cars, their clothes, their watches, their phones. To him, these were markers of worth, proof of belonging to a world he had clawed his way into. Yet Emily, with nothing but her cracked phone and a pressed but faded uniform, carried herself now as though she owned something he didn't, something he couldn't buy. He tapped his fingers against the table, frustration growing. He hated not knowing. And more than that, he hated the idea that he might have been wrong about someone. "Excuse me," Victor finally said as Emily passed by. His voice was softer this time, almost hesitant. She stopped, balancing a tray of dirty glasses. "Yes?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure how to frame the question without sounding like he cared too much. "That opportunity you mentioned, what exactly was it?" Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised he was still dwelling on it. For a moment, she considered brushing him off. But she also knew there was power in her truth, and maybe he needed to hear it. "It was a fellowship," she said simply, "one that only a handful of people get. I applied months ago and I was just accepted tonight." Victor blinked. "A fellowship? For what?" Emily's lips curved faintly, her voice steady. "For building programs that help families like the one I grew up in. Programs that feed children, that give them a chance to study, that make sure they don't have to choose between hunger and education. It's about giving them a future." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had grown up with everything, silver spoon firmly in place. His world had been tutors, chauffeurs, and private schools. The idea of children struggling for food was something he had read in reports, but never seen up close. And here was a woman who had lived it, fought her way through it, and was now determined to change it for others. He cleared his throat, trying to mask his discomfort. "That's admirable, I guess. But fellowships don't pay billions." His attempt at sarcasm fell flat, and Emily noticed. She met his gaze evenly. Not everything is about billions. Sometimes it's about impact. And impact lasts longer than money. Her words lodged themselves deep in his mind. He couldn't shake them. Even as she walked away, he found himself leaning back, unsettled. Nobody talked to him that way. Not his business partners, not his friends, not even his rivals. They either feared him or envied him. But she simply existed outside of his game entirely, and somehow that gave her more power over him than he wanted to admit. Later that night, when the dinner rush died down, Emily stepped outside for a quick breath of air. The city lights glimmered above, the hum of traffic blending with laughter from nearby bars. She pulled out her old phone again, scrolling through the email that confirmed her fellowship acceptance. Tears pricked her eyes as she read it over and over, hardly believing it was real. Behind her, the restaurant door opened, and she stiffened as Victor stepped out. He loosened his tie, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, just stood there with his hands in his pockets. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I was out of line earlier." Emily glanced at him, startled. She hadn't expected an apology, least of all from him. "Yes," she said simply, "you were." Victor exhaled, his gaze drifting to the street. "I don't usually apologize, but tonight maybe I should." Emily studied him, unsure if he meant it or if this was another performance. Yet there was something in his tone, an edge of sincerity, awkward and unpracticed, that made her pause. "Why does it bother you so much?" she asked. "What does my phone or my fellowship have to do with you?" He frowned, as if struggling with the question himself. "Because," he admitted slowly, "I built my life on the idea that people without money don't matter. That if you can't keep up, you're irrelevant, but you proved me wrong, and I don't like being wrong." Emily crossed her arms, her voice firm. "Maybe it's time you stop measuring people by their bank accounts." Victor let out a humorless laugh. "Easier said than done." For a while they stood in silence, the cool night air wrapping around them. Emily finally turned to head back inside. "Whether you change or not, that's up to you. But I won't let your opinion or anyone's define me anymore. Not tonight." Victor watched her disappear through the door, his chest tight with something unfamiliar. Respect, guilt, curiosity. Maybe all three. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not because of money or power, but because a woman with nothing had managed to show him everything he lacked. And as he stood alone in the night, one thing became clear. This wasn't the last time their paths would cross. The following week, the restaurant buzzed with the same familiar rhythm, customers coming and going, dishes clattering, music floating through the air. Yet for Emily, everything felt different. Each step she took, each order she wrote down, carried a new kind of energy. She was no longer just a waitress saving tips to pay rent. She was someone chosen. Someone who had a future beyond these walls. The cracked phone in her pocket no longer embarrassed her. It had become a symbol of perseverance, proof that even the smallest, most overlooked things could hold power. Victor, on the other hand, hadn't been able to shake the night of their encounter. He had replayed it in his mind more times than he cared to admit. Her steady gaze, her unwavering words, the way she had dismissed his billions as irrelevant in the face of impact. It gnawed at him, an unfamiliar crack in the wall of his arrogance. He returned to the restaurant, not because he loved the food, but because he needed answers he wasn't even sure he could articulate. That evening, when Emily approached his table, her expression was neutral, professional. "What can I get for you tonight, Mr. Harrington?" she asked. There was no malice in her tone, but no warmth either. Just respect for her job. Victor studied her, then leaned forward. "I want to talk," he said. Emily raised an eyebrow. "About food, I assume?" He smirked faintly. "About you," she exhaled sharply, unimpressed. "I'm working." But Victor wasn't deterred. "Then let me make it worth your while. I'll tip you double if you give me 5 minutes after your shift." Emily stared at him, torn between annoyance and curiosity. She didn't want his money, didn't want to give him the satisfaction. Yet some part of her wondered what could be so important that a man like him was willing to wait around just to speak to her. Hours later, when the last table had cleared out and chairs were being stacked, Emily found Victor still sitting at the corner booth, scrolling through his phone. He looked out of place, too polished, too powerful in the dim, closing restaurant. She approached cautiously. 5 minutes, she reminded him. Victor set his phone aside. That fellowship, he began. What are you going to do with it? Emily blinked. She hadn't expected that. I told you, she said slowly. It's about building programs for families in need. Yes, but specifics, he pressed. What's your vision? What's the plan? His tone wasn't mocking this time. It was sharp, focused. The same tone he used in boardrooms when evaluating billion-dollar deals. Emily hesitated, then crossed her arms. Why do you care? Victor leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Because I've spent my life funding ventures, investing in startups, buying companies, but none of them had the conviction you had in your voice the other night. I want to know what makes you different. Emily's heart raced. She didn't trust him, not yet. But something in his intensity told her he wasn't playing games, so she told him. She spoke of her vision to create sustainable food programs in urban neighborhoods, where families often had to rely on fast food because fresh produce was too expensive or too far away. She explained her idea of community kitchens, partnerships with local farmers, nutrition workshops for children. Her words flowed with passion, her hands moving as though painting the picture in the air. Victor listened, and for once he didn't interrupt. He didn't smirk or belittle. He just listened. When she finished, there was silence between them. Finally, Victor said quietly, You realize what you're describing isn't just noble, it's scalable. Emily frowned. This isn't about scaling, it's about people. It can be both, Victor countered. Impact and growth don't have to be enemies. She shook her head. You don't get it. This isn't some business pitch. This is my life. Victor's lips curved faintly, though it wasn't his usual arrogant smile. Maybe I want to get it. Emily blinked, caught off guard. There was something raw in his voice, something she hadn't heard before. For a moment she saw not the billionaire who mocked her, but a man searching for meaning in the midst of his excess. Why? She asked softly. Victor hesitated, then admitted, Because I've built an empire and still feel empty. And somehow in one night you, with nothing, made me realize it. Emily's breath caught. She hadn't expected such honesty. Yet before she could respond, her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She pulled it out, and Victor's eyes fell on the cracked screen once more. But this time he didn't laugh. This time his heart thudded with curiosity, almost dread. Emily answered, her voice low. Hello? Her face shifted as she listened, first confusion, then shock. What? That can't be. Victor leaned forward, his pulse quickening. Emily's hand trembled as she clutched the phone tighter. Whoever was on the other end was telling her something that turned her world upside down. Her lips parted, her voice barely above a whisper. You're saying, Victor Harrington? The name echoed between them like a thunderclap. Victor froze, his blood running cold. Whatever secret that phone call carried, it wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about him. Emily stood frozen, the cracked phone pressed against her ear, her chest heaving as the voice on the other end continued. Her eyes darted to Victor, who sat across the booth, his face pale for the first time since she had met him. She repeated the name again, her voice trembling. Victor Harrington. The restaurant was empty now, the lights dimmed for closing, the hum of refrigerators in the background filling the silence between words. Victor leaned forward, his throat dry. What did they say? Emily held up a hand, signaling him to wait, though her own pulse thundered in her ears. Yes, I understand, she whispered into the phone. Please send me the documents. I'll need to see everything. She ended the call slowly, her fingers stiff, then lowered the phone onto the table like it weighed 100 pounds. Victor stared at her, his usual confidence cracked. What was that? Who are you talking to? Emily's lips parted, but the words wouldn't come at first. When they finally did, they came like shards of glass. That was the fellowship office. They were calling because while reviewing applications, they discovered something connected to you. Victor frowned, unease spreading through him. To me? How? Emily's eyes locked onto his, fierce now despite her trembling hands. The program is partially funded by the Harrington Foundation. Your foundation. They said your signature was on the funding contract that made this fellowship possible. Without it, there wouldn't even be a program. Victor blinked, stunned. He had signed hundreds of contracts, approved countless checks, rarely reading more than a summary. To him, it had all been numbers and tax write-offs. He swallowed hard. So, I gave the money, and I got the chance. Emily finished for him. Her voice wavered between anger and disbelief. Do you understand? You mocked me for being poor, humiliated me in front of your friends, and yet the only reason I even had that phone call, the only reason I was chosen, is because of you. The words cut through the air like a knife. Victor sat back, his jaw tight, his chest hollow. He had spent years believing his donations were meaningless gestures, ways to polish his image or satisfy investors. He had never cared where the money went, never thought about the lives it touched. Until now. Until her. Emily rose from the booth, her hands clenched at her sides. Do you realize the irony, Victor? You laughed at my phone, called me irrelevant, and yet your name, your money, is tied to the very thing that will take me away from this restaurant. Away from people like you. Her eyes glistened, but they burned with pride rather than shame. Victor's throat tightened. For once, he had no clever retort, no smug grin. He only had the crushing realization that his billions had done more good in her hands than they had ever done in his own. Emily, he said quietly, his voice almost pleading. I didn't know. Exactly, she snapped. You never cared to know. To you, people like me don't matter until we suddenly do. But I'm not here to validate your conscience. I'm here to build something real, something that will outlive your money and my cracked phone. She turned to leave, her steps quick, but Victor stood abruptly. Wait. She froze, glancing back over her shoulder. His expression was different now, raw, stripped of arrogance. Let me help, he said. Emily narrowed her eyes. Help or control? Help, he repeated firmly. Not as Victor Harrington, the billionaire, but as a man who finally understands. He's been blind his whole life. Emily studied him, her heart warring with itself. Part of her wanted to walk away, to leave him with his guilt. But another part, the part that had always believed in second chances, hesitated. If you really mean that, she said slowly, then prove it. Not with money, not with words. Prove it by standing with the people you've ignored. Prove it by seeing us, not as projects, not as charity cases, but as equals. Victor's chest tightened, but he nodded. I will. For a long moment they held each other's gaze. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was charged with possibility. Finally, Emily broke it. I don't know if I can ever forgive the way you treated me, but I do know this. If you truly want to change, then maybe this is your chance. Not for me, not for your reputation, but for yourself. She walked toward the door, her cracked phone clutched tightly in her hand. Victor didn't follow, but his eyes tracked her until she disappeared into the night. He sat back down, the weight of his empire pressing on his shoulders like never before. For the first time, he didn't feel proud of it. He felt ashamed. Yet somewhere beneath that shame flickered a spark of hope, the same spark Emily carried with her. Weeks later, as Emily packed her few belongings for New York, she slipped the old phone into her bag. She couldn't bring herself to replace it yet. It had become more than just a device. It was a reminder of the night she was mocked, the night she was chosen, the night she learned her strength. And miles away, Victor stared out of his penthouse window, the city lights glittering below. His empire was still vast, his billions intact, but his perspective had shifted forever. He thought of Emily Carter, the waitress with the cracked phone, and the call that had stunned him into silence. For once, the man who thought he had everything realized he was only just beginning to learn what truly mattered.